All right. Howdy guys, I'm Jeepin' Jason, and today on Auto Edits, we're gonna be doing some Jeep tuning. Now, that's just part of becoming a better driver and building a better rig, is going on a trip, figuring out what went right, what went wrong, and making the changes to improve your rig and analyze your driving style to get better. I'm gonna be adding some wheel spacers, gonna be putting the rear sway bar back on, lots of stuff. So come on in and let's check this out. Now, I would say the Jeep did overall excellent on my trip out to Moab. I drove 800 miles there in the most comfort. I actually pushed it so hard down the highway going 85 for extended periods that part it's driven better than ever. It did great on the trails. I needed some updating and refreshing on my skill set. So definitely can use some improvements there. But what I want to show you in this video is how to identify the little things that are going wrong on your Jeep or going right, or, you know, acknowledge those things and then be able to change to improve. Like, that's a really important part of this process, is actually building it, testing it, and not just always breaking it and then going out again, but just improving on what you've already got. So here we go. Now, since we're gonna start at the front, let's talk about the axle and steering and things like that. It was phenomenal, beyond any expectations I had for what the Jeep should perform like in combination driving. Like, I always want to make this thing so I can drive it 800 miles each way, interstate, to go wheeling and then come home comfortably. Now, the problem with that was, I'll show you in a minute, that I was able to sustain higher highway speeds for the longest amount of time, or longer than I've ever done before. It was just very comfortable to go 85 miles an hour down the highway for, you know, that's the speed limit in, or at least, I mean, 80 miles an hour is the speed limit throughout Utah. And I was able to go that very comfortably for a long time, and that actually was hard on the transmission. I might have overfilled it. I'll show you guys in a minute that little thing, but it was comfortable. Easy to go down the highway at that speed. Now, that is in part to a couple of things that we've done over this last several months. The PSC steering changed a lot of the feel of the steering, has just made it so smooth and easy to steer, and that was just a huge improvement there. Now, I know that's a huge expense. It's a very costly upgrade. A lot of Jeep stuff is turning out. But that's one of those things that, to you Jeepers that are kind of inching their rigs up to a more capable and all well-rounded wheeler, consider going this way. At least get the PSC big bore box. That, to me, just the feel, it's a slightly tighter, or a slightly more aggressive ratio. The cylinder turned out to be amazing. I mean, amazing. On the trails, it was next level. The comfort and the ability to feed steering input whenever I want to was great. So this is huge. This turned out to be a massive upgrade. Between the forged C's on the Fusion Elite axle here and the rare parts load sharing ball joints, the steering now feels more smooth and responsive. Steering's next level on this. Now, one of the things I found when I was in Moab, I put it on the Metal Cloak CTI trailer, and that flexed the thing out, and you get a really good chance to really assess and look at your rig. And I found out that, like I knew, I was conservative. I put more bump stops than I thought I could to keep my tires out, because over the years I've been able to, I tested those limits. Right here. You're fine. And I actually feel better having a little bit more bump stop and keeping my tires in case I do some high-speed goofiness, which I tend to do a lot, which is a good thing, actually. And so I actually am glad that I have conservative on the bump stops, keep my tires out of here. Sure, there's a little bit more up travel that feels good knowing that that's there. So the only thing I really found wrong on the front end was the drag link had hit one of the fittings on the hydraulic assist ram, and it bent it. Luckily, that kit comes with a steel AN fitting here, and that's supposed to be a 90, and you can see in this video here, it had been bent into a 45, so it was pretty aggressive, and I was able to just bend that back, get it into position, and tighten it. And then the only thing I did to fix that, or to tune that, was to actually tilt the ram backwards a little bit to give it a little bit more room. So there you go, knock that off the list. So otherwise, the steering, the front end, the suspension, the geometry, the feel was fantastic, next level. Everything up here is an absolute home run. So that I'm very, very thrilled, proud of right there. So in the front here, the only other tweaking thing we have to do is I'm gonna go ahead and put these G2 1.5" wheel spacers back on. Now I had run these back from when I got the very first 37-inch tires on the stock Jeep and the stock Rubicon wheels. I had gotten these because the back space is such that the wheels just need to be pushed out a bit because the tires get into, you know, suspension components and frame rails way too easy. Now I took these things off before I did that Death Valley trip, and I was doing some experimentations. I took the rear sway bar off, I took the wheel spacers off, kind of tightened up the footprint a little bit and was experimenting with that. And it turned out I didn't like it. We are gonna undo both of those things in this video because I want my rear sway bar back. You'll see this panic look on my face from running Moab Rim Trail, which is a lot of off-camber stuff up there in Moab. And you know, that was partially my inexperience and also just partially me being really scared and not used to having the body want to flop so uncontrollably over. I'm a proponent of having that rear sway bar back there. So 1.5" spacers going on. These are G2 brand. I think that there's, you know, wheel spacers get a bad rap because they're bought cheaply somewhere and then not maintained or regularly checked. So I find get a high quality ones, like get the G2 or get the Synergy ones, and then periodically check them. Just don't ignore them. It's like anything on your rig, you've got to service it every once in a while. That's another tip right there, is always kind of tighten down very gently crosswise. And that way, if you don't have something that's a hub centric, which means that there's an actual machine ring that keeps it hub centric, use the flanges on the lugs to actually center it down by just gently snugging it like that, going across, snug it, and then likewise. Now you know that it's centered and seated, and then you give it a couple of ugga-duggas with your wrench. Now I'll put this, there's a link to this. Actually, there's a link to this in my Amazon store, both the wrench and the Bones gloves. That helps me out, so help support the channel by going to the Amazon store. I've been stoked with this Craftsman impact wrench, and it's that familiarity. I know how many ugga-duggas will actually get me 110, but for you, use the torque wrench. I will too. So that's 2 ugga-duggas all the way around. We'll check that in a minute with the torque wrench, but that's some fun for you. So let me explain a little bit about what I mean when I say backspace of these wheels being such that it doesn't allow for the maximum clearance inside here. Now, the backspace that's the reference between the mounting face of the wheel here to the actual inside of the rim here. Now on these wheels, on the Vision Manx beadlocks here, it's extremely conservative. I was actually surprised, and they didn't offer any other variants. It was 4.5 inches. You really want that backspace to be shallower, like actually to move the wheel out a little bit. So you want that to be like 3 3/4. 4 is fine. 4 is actually pretty good right in the middle. That's what you want to kind of look for. And so it's kind of frustrating to have to put an 1.5" spacer on. That's a little too far in my opinion, but it's what I got. And so that's what I'm going to go with for now until I figure out the final way to go here. But let me bring you in and show you why the back is what dictates the spacers having to go back on. The front was amazing, which is funny because there's all that steering, the wheels do so much more stuff. The back is why we're putting the spacers back on for 2 reasons. Check this out. First up, I noticed the rear tires were rubbing up against the upper control arms, only at articulation. And here's a good example of that on the trail, where you can see the dirt being rubbed off as I climb the trail. So tires need to be moved out a little bit there. All right, so here's that trick I was talking about, how to best center your lugs. You get them all started and then you get one tightened down just until, see how it wiggles there? So you don't wanna have that bind that up. So you can see when that just tightens up right there. And then now that gives it wiggle room for when you tighten the cross lug. Now you know that these things are square and it's not binding in any of those the bevels there. Then you can hammer down on it. It's time to reinstall the stock sway bar. I don't have anything fancy in there, so let's just get these. These are our mounting bolts off, and this will take a little bit of jostling, but we can get her. This sway bar link, when it's hooked up in the right position, because of that shallow backspace on those wheels, it rubs the tire right here. I mean, just right there. So it's one of those things that as I started to articulate, I noticed that that was a point of contact and it's something that needed to be addressed. So we're gonna just go back to the baseline that I had before. We're gonna run the rear sway bar. I like it, I prefer it. It's not for everybody, but I'm just sharing with you guys what I learned as I go along, and that's the whole beauty of this channel. You guys chime in on your experiences as well, and some of you will benefit from this. Don't go pull your rear sway bar off because you hear some dudes on a forum say that, oh, you gotta pull that off for best articulation. I disagree now, and for everything else I do, I like it there. So sway bar is going back on. So same tightening technique on the wheels. Do a snug, snug, and then all the way around snug, and then ugga-duggas. See, now there's plenty of room between the sway bar link and the tire. I mean, it was just so close before that at flex, you could see the witness marks around the inside of the bead of the tire. So it was definitely something that needed to be addressed. Just like it looks like there's plenty of room to the control arm, but again, at flex, and that's why getting it on the trail is the best place to find these things, and then you deal with them here in the garage. All right, and now for some learning. On the very first obstacle on that Moab Rim trail run, there was like a 2.5 foot ledge that looked easy enough to climb, and I couldn't do it. I struggled on it really hard, and there was nerves involved, there was a cliff involved. It was my first hard trail in a long time. So there's all that stuff in play, but now is the time to assess what went wrong. I'm fortunate I had a GoPro, so I'm able to look at some of this stuff. And what I ended up getting caught on, and half of it was just inexperience coming back at something like that in such a long time, is that what I did was I squared up on it. Like a lot of people, because I kept showing where I was just spinning my tires, everybody's saying that my tires are worn out. Now, yeah, the tires have over 30,000 miles on them. They're tired. Get it, what I did there? So yeah, sure enough, I could use definitely newer tires, softer compound. These are just regular old Patagonias there. Nate was running that exact tire, 38 Patagonia, but he had the black label. That's the competition, super soft. And he brought a lot of experience to the table. So what I found was that I was hanging up right here. Now there are witness marks on both of these. These are the Metal Cloak DB3 brackets, and that stands for drop bracket 3 inches. Now what that does is it simulates a long arm rear suspension, but picks up the mounts here, so you don't actually have to weld and do all this fabrication to make a long arm here. Now some of the things I read online was that this exact complaint, that they catch on stuff. Now here's my response to that. Sure, that was frustrating, and you saw my face. See this face? That's the face of a very scared dude because there's a cliff and I couldn't figure it out. But so this is a learning moment, right? So this is one of those things where I feel like, okay, well, here's my response to that. If you had actual long arms, what do you think would be right here? Sure, it still has a nice angle to it, but there would be an arm here. You still catch on long arms, right? So in my head, the calibration that I'm gonna do is not to square up on obstacles like that. That was the problem. Even though I angled it a little bit, I didn't angle it enough, and that was because of the proximity to that cliff and the tippiness of it. So in the future, if you notice, so that obstacle and the very next obstacle, I started to do some angle, but because of my first failed attempt, that knocked the Jeep into a more squared up approach where I was trying the angle, but you get knocked, so then you get knocked into places where you don't necessarily want to be. I ended up getting up that thing, but it took good spotting and some just skinny pedal. Now, so that's again one of those things where you can now get under your rig, see what's going on. This is exactly tells me that. So both of these have witness marks on them from the rocks from me getting squared up and just caught right here. So the way to get around that is to figure out a way to get your tires angled and really take advantage of the articulation of the Jeep. Like, here's a really great moment. Now, too bad I only just had the GoPro on the side here to show this, but you can even hear Mike listen to what Mike says on the radio after I run across. This is a traverse after failing that ledge.
That thing looks like a spider, man. You just went sideways, cut across. That looks pretty cool.
And that's what he's seeing, is that the Jeep articulated its way across that ledge there over to the regular route or the bypass, and that just shows that there's so much there to use. Like, and you can see the rest of the trail. I actually was starting to get my bearings and was, even though I was scared of the off-camber stuff, which that sway bar will help, I was definitely getting the tire placement better and better. So I knew, you know, in my head already, I was like, oh, I feel like I'm squared up on this obstacle and catching next time. And like when I did the Z-turn, check this out, I was able to just walk right up this, got a little bit of a catch at the last lip, gave it a little bump, got right over it. So it's funny to really apply that tuning to your Jeep. It applies to all cars, not just race cars or street cars. You gotta tune and tweak and adjust, dial in your driving skills. This is how you do it right here, guys. So I'm hoping you guys learn. We're coming along. Like, I shared with you guys all of my butt clenching moments on that trail, and I wasn't gonna try to pretend like I'm some guy, like there's some problem with the equipment. This is how you learn how to drive the equipment you have. But as I was down here doing my checks, I found a leak on one of the upper bolts of the rear diff cover, and that just tells you that that housing is being asked more than it's capable of. When you're stretching and all the bolts are tight, when you're deforming the Dana 44 housing back there that much to leak oil out of the top bolts, that is the main reason why I'm saving up to get the Fusion 60 back here, the 60 hybrid that has the 60 center and then JK outers. So that's the biggest reason why I feel like that's necessary for me in the back, but in the front, I've been stoked with the Elite 44. Now, in case you're wondering, I did wire up the Eaton locker to the stock Rubicon harness with the Dana Spicer adapter that actually fools the computer thinking that the stock locker is there. So this thing actually activates just like the stock locker does. So that does work. Now, the trick here is obviously lock it up and put it in four-wheel drive with the thing in gear, and you can now torque the front. After a big trip like that, it's a great time to double check your fluids, air filter. After all that, mine looks actually amazingly good. The dust was relatively low because we had snow. It was wet most of the time. It was perfect conditions. Now, I do love pointing out right now that my PSC reservoir for the power steering system is spotless after all of that driving and wheeling, and that's because of the cooler and the fact actually that this whole system is so next level. And we'll go ahead and check the fluid. Yeah, it's still perfect in there. It looks great. So that's just yet another thing of just taking care of your rig so your rig takes care of you out on the trails. So I hope you guys got a little bit out of that. Enjoy that video. Those are just some of the things that I've learned, and I'm loving being able to pass those along to some of you guys. And for those of you that are more experienced, feel free to chime off with more tips and tricks in the comments. And as usual, thank you guys so much for watching. Until next time, enjoy your drive.